afternoon, everybody. What is a knot? What is a knot? I'm not asking, it's a rhetorical question. The real definition of a knot is something that is easy to tie, it stays tied, and it's easy to untie. Now, some of the ladies here, you got long hair. I'm sure growing up you've experienced knots or tangles in your hair. Everybody here grew up in the age when you actually had to tie your shoelaces. You didn't have the joy of Velcro or slip-on shoes. Everybody had to tie their own shoelaces. And invariably you ended up with a knot. Well, it didn't maybe start out that way. You thought you were tying it properly, but then when you went to untie it or somewhere in the process you got lost and it was just a complete and utter tangle. Knots, however, are not always a bad thing. Knots can be very, very useful. Whether you're trying to tie something to the top of your car and you don't want it to fly away, maybe perhaps you've got a horse, maybe you've got a dog, maybe you're trying to set up a tent and you want to make sure that it doesn't get blown away or that it doesn't collapse. So, if the definition of a knot is something that's easy to tie, it stays tied, and it's easy to untie, what exactly are some good knots? Now, Joe, you saw me fiddling with this. Seems long, right? You know, right? So if you grab that end, so is this a knot, or is it not a knot? No, it's not. That's right. It is not a knot. It was very easy to tie. It was even easier to untie, but as you notice, it did not stay tied at all. So, what are some knots you can use? As a Boy Scout leader, I teach my guys all sorts of knots. One of the very first ones they have to learn, I'll teach you at the end of my presentation. There's other ones though. Say for instance, you want to tie something to the top of your car. That happens often. You're going somewhere, maybe you go to Home Depot, you buy some stuff, buy some lumber, and you've got to tie it down. A lot of knots are called hitches, and one of them is called a 2/2 hitch. Any idea why it's called a 2/2 hitch? Anybody? What?
It's got 2 half hitches.
Exactly, because it's 2 half hitches. It's 1 half hitch right after the other. Now, could you do a triple half hitch? Probably, but there's really not any point. So, what is a half hitch? Well, it's simply that. That doesn't seem like a very useful knot because it just comes right undone. However, if you do it twice, bum, ba, ba, ba. Make sure I do this right. I want to make sure I get it right. Should have used a little bit more length. Now, hopefully I don't knock the podium over, but now you have a knot that's not going to come undone. Now, how is that working? Now, obviously, I had a little bit of struggle there. I should have left myself a little bit more length. But it was relatively easy to tie. It's staying tied. And it comes untied very easily. Very nice, right? Well, not all the time do you just want to tie a length of rope to something and you want it to stay. Sometimes you need to be able to make a change to that. Maybe you are hanging something up, maybe you're running a clothesline, maybe you decide to go camping and you want to set up a line to dry clothes. Maybe you set up a tent and maybe one of the parts of one of the poles broke or something along those lines. You need to be able to adjust that rope. We don't have to untie it every time, especially if you've already attached it to something very heavy. So what do? You do something similar to what was just done. You make your simple half hitch, make another half hitch, so this is not a 2/2 hitch, and then you come back to the outside and run it through. Now, this should hold tight. Seems like just the exact same thing as before, right? Well, now this time though, hold on to that end.
Sure.
So if you pull tight, okay, but now say we've decided to hang some clothes on the line or we had some clothes on the line and now it's starting to sag. So if you release the tension, well, I need to tighten it back up, and then if you pull again, it should maintain now the shorter length. And I could even tighten it up more, or if I decide, okay, I need less tension, maybe I need to get to whatever it is I've got this hanging over. Thank you very much, Dan.
Don't let go.
And again, comes untied very easily. Now, the last one that I really wanted, second to last one I wanted to show you, I should say. This one can come in very handy. I mean, how many times have all of us fallen down a cliff and broken our arms? Like a bunch of times, right? Exactly. So somebody's up at the top of the cliff, like Ben, and she's so strong because I see her in class all the time. She's going to lift me up. Well, if I just hold onto the rope, it's just going to rip right through my hand, and I'm going to get on it. Okay, so give me some slack. So now say, oh no, I've fallen down and I've broken my arm, so I only have one arm. Now, I've tied a bowline around my waist, and if I had to, I could even work it up around my chest, and this is what a fireman might use, or a Coast Guard might use to lift you out of the water. Now I've got a nice big loop that supports my body, and then Dan will be up there on the top of the cliff pulling me out. Harder, no. If I'm lucky, she'll have some help, like a truck. Thank you very much. Now, the last one I want to show you, and I've got lengths of rope, and I've got examples of some of the various knots right here, so if anybody wants to take one when they leave, feel free. The last knot I wanted to show you is called a square knot. And in Boy Scouts, we call this the joining knot, because it's one of the first knots, it is the first knot they learn when joining Boy Scouts, but it's also a knot you can use to tie two separate pieces of rope together. And it's very simple. Right over left, left over right. And it makes sort of a figure-8 design, and then no matter how much you were to pull, there's no way that those two will ever come apart. And so I'd like to thank you for joining me here today.